Following Jesus' lead in the parables, last week we reflected on seeds, and now it's weeds. For the agrarian society of Jesus' day, and for many parts of our world today, the agricultural images and metaphors of these parables make a lot of sense. But for many people, myself included, living in an urban environment, we don't have a deep connection with nature like a farmer or a gardener does. I have a black thumb, and not just on Ash Wednesday. In fact, it's so bad that in the rectory, even plastic flowers die. Now, not knowing much about weeds, I Googled them to see what they're about. Weeds are defined as, quote, any plant growing where it is not wanted. It went on to explain that while weeds are usually thought of as just a nuisance, they can in fact be quite useful. Dandelions are used by some in cooking along with gardoons and plantains, which are both cultivated and grow in the wild. Milkweed is a more effective insulator than goose down, and goldenrod can be used to produce tires. Who knew? And then, of course, there's just plain weed. Marijuana, being extolled for its medicinal benefits, is now legal for medical usage in 38 states. Obviously, it isn't so easy to tell just what exactly is a weed. This confusion is part of the farmer's rationale in the parable we have just heard. The farmer advises his zealous workers who want to work diligently to weed the farmer's farmland immediately. He says, let the field alone for now, and in the end, we will carefully and gently separate the wheat from the weeds, lest in the efforts to separate them now, you end up destroying both the weeds and the wheat. In the end, the interesting lessons learned here are not about agriculture, but rather about cultural and religious values. Do we clearly recognize the way in which God treats us? And what does that mean for how we should treat each other? Perhaps there are three lessons that we can take away from this parable today. The first is patience. The wise farmer knows that it is difficult to discern wheat from weed, good from evil, in any given moment. God, like the farmer, is willing to wait for us. Give us time to grow. Give us time to change. God has unlimited patience with us, allowing us chance after chance to grow in goodness. On the other hand, how often do we fail to reflect the same patience with one another? In our haste to run to judgment and punishment to secure a weed-free environment, we risk destroying others whom we presume are weeds and therefore worthless. God is infinitely patient with us. No one is entirely wheat or weed, but in the garden of all of our hearts, there is some of both. This brings us to a second lesson outlined by the poet-farmer Wendell Berry in his Prayers and Sayings of the Mad Farmer. He writes this: the finest growth that farmland can produce is a careful farmer. Make the human race a better head, make the world a better piece of ground. Wendell Berry is telling the farmer and us not to worry so much about the crops, the product, as the cultivation of the land and the farmers and our own mind. And this brings us to a third and final lesson, that of our interconnectedness to one another, to the entire world, and to God. How can this interconnectedness be lived out? Through gratitude, generosity, and stewardship. First, gratitude. Living with gratitude for the gifts that are ours each day, the food on our table, the seemingly endless supply of water that quenches our thirst and washes our dishes, and a recognition that this abundance is not shared by so much of the world's population. This gratitude should lead us to generosity, recognizing how truly blessed we are, blessed beyond anything we may think we have earned or deserved. We should seek to cultivate a spirit of profound generosity, a willingness to share the riches that we have received, while so many are without. But beyond addressing the symptoms of hunger and poverty, generosity and gratitude must lead us to stewardship of the earth and its peoples. We are charged with challenging the sinful social structures that create such disparity and such despair. The first chapter of Genesis reminds us how in the primal perfect garden, God gave our ancestors and us responsibility for the earth and everything and everyone on it. It says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth.'" Pope Francis, in his encyclical Laudato Si, calls for an ecological conversion, challenging us to recognize our place in the interlocking relationships of creation. He proposes a new environmental education that, in his words, seeks to restore the various levels of ecological equilibrium, establishing harmony within ourselves, with others, with nature and living creatures, and with God. In God's garden, this good earth, there is always time to grow and time to produce something good. Is the world Eden? Not yet. But with gratitude, attentiveness, generosity, and patience, together we can make a better place for all people.